Howdy folks, and welcome back to Random Jank. I'm Chris Taylor, and I know it's been a long time since you've seen one of these, but hey, today's the release of the new core set, and what better way to start Season 2 than with a brand new core set of Magic cards. We have a new set, I have a new Wait a sec. This isn't a new set? Look, if we're gonna start off this thing brand new, we have to start it right. Doesn't that look a lot better? So every single year when Wizards decides to release a core set, 99% of the time they do a little bit of tweaking on the rules. And this time around they didn't do anything all that major with one exception, the Legends rule. Now the Legends rule has been around since the dawn of the game and it has gone through multiple iterations. This time around they changed it so that, okay, for example, if you had a Grimgrin the Corpseborn out and I decided to cast a Grimgrin the Corpseborn myself, because there's only one of those creatures that exists in the entirety of the Magic story, they would both just die because, well, the flavor of it is more like the two creatures just can't exist in two different sides of the field at the same time. It would act like both creatures were there, they would get destroyed, no one would actually have a chance to be able to use those creatures. Now, this time around when they decided to tweak the Legendary rule, they made it so that I can have one on the field and you can have one on the field and it won't affect anything. So a good example of how the new ruling really affects things is with Thalia from the Dark Ascension expansion. Now, under normal circumstances, because you can only have one copy of a creature out at the same time, her ability of making all non-creature spells cost one extra to cast would only be affected one time. But because you can have one out and your opponent can have one out, if you want to cast anything that's not a creature, it now costs two. Now, from a gameplay standpoint, I don't mind this change. Wizards has always done a good job of trying to keep new players into playing the game, and by having to keep track of a lot of new information on both sides of the field is usually just too much complexity. Like, you're paying attention to too many things and your brain gets overloaded with information to the point where you just can't concentrate on everything at once. But from a flavor standpoint, it makes absolutely no sense that you can have two creatures with the same name that are essentially the same person on the field at the same time. It would be like if I was Hercules and you were Hercules and we were looking at each other and we were waving like this. Does that make sense? Personally for me, I don't like this new change. However, the next expansion after the core set is Theros, and we've already seen through a lot of the art and through a lot of the talking that they've been doing is that it's going to be kind of based on Greek mythology. Now, my theory here is that there's going to be a lot of new legendary things, and when you go to things like pre-releases or when you want to play games with your friends, there's going to be a lot more legendary things out in the open. It's kind of like when the Kamigawa block was out, and there was a lot of legendary creatures in that too. So Wizards wants you to be able to use your spells and use your cards and be able to have all of your abilities out there and make a fun experience for everybody where they all get to use their things. And they kind of want to stop people from just cloning your Grimgrin as a kill spell rather than as an actual clone spell, which is what they made the card for. I understand why Wizards wants to do it. From a flavor standpoint, which is going to be this entire episode, it makes no sense to me, and I really wish that they wouldn't have changed this. I understand why, I just don't like it. And the big change with the core set, aside from specifically with the rules, is the returning mechanic. Now, last year's returning mechanic was Exalted. The year before that was Bloodthirst. This year, we actually get a creature type, Slivers. Something that I've been looking forward to seeing new of since I started playing way back in Tempest. But again, in the act of making the game a little bit more simpler for newer players, or at the very least keeping them around longer, they've decided to make a change. Now, in the original set, Slivers had always been like the Lord subset of creatures. If you take a look at cards like Stromkirk Captain, or even in earlier sets like Lord of the Unreal, Lords used to have an ability that shared itself with all other creature types of the same creature type. In the older sets, like Lord of the Unreal, it would be shared to all creature types regardless of who owned it. But in newer ones, like Stromkirk Captain, it's only the ones on your side. It only affects your things. Now, in the long run, that's a lot better, because if your opponent has vampires and you want to buff up your vampires, you don't want your opponent to be getting that buff. It kind of makes it so that some people didn't want to be using those cards in the first place. But in this particular case, Slivers have never really been a friendly race, per se. Like, if you're looking at the flavor of the creature, they've always been a really hive-minded way of thinking, and all Slivers kind of bounce all of their abilities to all other Slivers. So it shouldn't matter whether or not it's only your slivers or only my slivers, because it's always been about all of them getting these abilities. Now in older sets there were things like Gemhide Sliver, which would give everything the ability to tap for any kind of mana as long as it was a sliver. And this is your opponents that were able to do it too. Nowadays we have a card called Manaweft Sliver. It's the exact same casting cost, but it only affects your side of the field. Now, again, to better balance the game, now that Wizards has a much better idea of what cards should be costed a certain way or what power level they want their game to be in, this is actually an uncommon card, whereas Gemhide Sliver came out as a common, so a lot more people had access to it. But I still have a major problem with the way these slivers are going to be played. It's everybody being able to benefit from this particular buff that made Sliver such an interesting race to play with. Now, again, I understand why Wizards is doing it. They're trying to keep the game very simple. They want people to only look at positive things on their side, because if you're giving a buff to your opponent, you're not necessarily going to want to put that in your deck. And maybe I'm just an old fogey who's been playing this game for too long and I don't like change, but I like the old way of playing where you had to play risky to have any kind of success. And truth be told, how many times have you played in a mirror match? For something nowadays, when you're playing in a limited tournament, I understand. You're going to see your opponents being able to play with slivers when you go to a pre-release or a draft. But when you're making your own constructed deck, 99% of the time, your opponent isn't necessarily going to be playing the same things that you are. Hopefully, they're playing something completely different. It's why the game has 12,000 different cards in it, so that everybody has their own style of play. So today's episode was mostly about flavor. I happen to like the older way of doing things, and Wizard has been changing a lot of things, for better or for worse. It really just depends. If you have an opinion on the matter, please let me know in the comments below. Thank you for waiting so long, and for the new subscribers that have been looking at our older videos, the new ones are going to just keep getting better and better. I'll see you next week. I can have one on the field, and you can have one on the field, and it won't affect anything. So, a good example would be for something like Thalia from the... You have the internet, right?
Yep.
The second big thing with this core set has nothing to do with rules. You're going to have to change that because that was wrong. And this is your opponents that were able to do it too. Nowadays, we have something called mana something.